Have you ever wondered how recruiters, especially in the super competitive world of network marketing, can take a flat-out no and somehow turn it into a yes? Well, today we're diving into a real playbook from a top performer. We're going to break down the psychological techniques they use to just completely dismantle skepticism. Let's get into it. So the playbook starts with this quote, and it really sets the stage for everything that follows. The whole idea here is that being educated has nothing to do with your diploma. It's all about your willingness to learn, to open your mind. And that concept, that idea of reframing a mindset, is the key to this entire strategy. All right, so here's our game plan. First, we'll look at the basic anatomy of any objection. Then, we're going to tackle the three big ones. You've got the classic, is this a scam? The personal doubt of, do I have enough money or time or skill? And then the practical question, what am I even selling? And finally, we'll bring it all together with the core technique, the ultimate reframe. Okay, first things first, what even is an objection? The core principle of this entire playbook is that a no is almost never really a no. It's just a cover for some deeper fear or a question that hasn't been answered yet. So the goal isn't to argue with the word no, it's to figure out what's really going on underneath. Right, let's dive into the biggest, scariest monster in the room, the legitimacy question. You know, the is this a scam objection? This is the one that can shut down a conversation instantly. And believe me, this playbook dedicates a ton of its energy to taking it apart piece by piece. So the approach here has a few different layers. It starts with hard proof, things like official government certificates. They even encourage the person to take the documents to a lawyer to get them checked out. Then they zoom out and make a logical argument. They'll say something like, look, we operate in places like Dubai and Saudi Arabia, where the laws are incredibly strict. If we were a scam, we couldn't exist there. It's this really clever mix of tangible proof and an appeal to global legitimacy. And this right here is a brilliant psychological move. They get ahead of the person's fear. When someone asks if it's one of those things, the script tells them to ask, oh, you mean a pyramid scheme? You know, the 2-under-2 structure? By defining the bad thing so narrowly, they can then introduce their own model, which they call a generation plan. Honestly, the details of their plan almost don't matter. What matters is that they've created this clear we're this, not that contrast in the person's mind, and it just neutralizes the objection. Okay, so let's move on to the next big category of objections. These are the internal ones, right? The self-doubts. I don't have enough money. I don't have enough time. I'm not smart enough. This is where the strategy shifts from proving the company is legit to building the person's belief in themselves. And here we have it, probably the most common objection in any kind of sale. I have no money. For most of us, that feels like a brick wall, right? The conversation's over. But for this playbook, it's the perfect opening. And this is the magic trick. They immediately reframe the objection as the very reason to act. The script literally says to respond, you don't have money? That's not the problem. That is exactly why you need to do this. It just flips the entire conversation on its head. Suddenly, the lack of money isn't a barrier anymore. It's the whole reason this opportunity exists. And to really hammer this point home, they change the words they use. They're very careful not to call it an investment. That word implies risk. It makes us nervous. Instead, they frame it as a simple purchase. You're giving money, and you're getting physical products of the exact same value right back, just like you would at any store. It's a simple change in language, but it massively lowers the feeling of financial risk. But what about that nagging fear, the one that whispers, what if no one joins me? That's a huge personal barrier. Instead of trying to deny that there's a risk, the playbook does something much smarter. It normalizes it by putting it in a much, much bigger context. And this is how they do it. They use these incredibly powerful emotional analogies. A soldier doesn't quit because they might get shot. You don't refuse to get married because you might get divorced. By putting the business risk right next to these huge, universal life risks, the fear of no one joining starts to feel a whole lot smaller and more manageable. Hey, remember that quote from the very beginning? Well, here it is again. When someone says, I'm not educated enough, the playbook brings them right back to that core idea. It redefines an uneducated person not as someone without a degree, but as someone who's just unwilling to learn. It totally shifts the conversation from what you've done in the past to what you're willing to do in the future. It makes the opportunity feel open to absolutely anyone. Okay, let's talk about the last big objection. And this is a fear a lot of people have. The idea of being a pushy salesperson. Nobody wants to be that person who goes door to door or tries to guilt their friends and family into buying stuff. So the playbook tackles this fear directly by just completely redefining the job. The script is explicit. You are not going door to door. You're not trying to convince people to buy products. Your main job is to sell the business opportunity itself. The product sales, they're presented as just a natural side effect of people joining the business. It reframes the role from product pusher to opportunity sharer. So, now that we've looked at all these individual tactics, let's zoom out and look at the one single strategy that connects everything. This is the engine behind the whole system, the ultimate reframe. This table just lays it all out so clearly. Look at the pattern. Someone says, I have no money. The reframe is, that's the very reason you have to do this. Someone says, it's a risk. The reframe, life is a risk. Again and again, the playbook finds the negative frame the person is using and just replaces it with a positive, action-oriented one. My friend failed becomes a question about your own choices. My parents disagree becomes a challenge about becoming independent. So here's the big takeaway. You never, ever argue with the objection. You don't try to prove it's not a risk or that they secretly do have money. Instead, you agree with the feeling behind their objection and then you pivot, making that exact feeling the reason they need to take action. Every single point of resistance gets turned into fuel for the fire. And that leaves us with one last question. Now that you can see this pattern so clearly, this technique of taking a problem and making it the reason for the solution, where else do you see it? Think about it. Political slogans, commercials, maybe even in your own day-to-day negotiations. Understanding this playbook doesn't just show you how one industry makes sales, it gives you a lens to see a really powerful form of persuasion that is happening all around us every single day.